Good morning, my friends. This is Deepak. As you can see, I'm wearing headphones today, and I've been watching all your comments, and a lot of you have complained over the last few days that the sound is poor, the image is jerky, on and on. So I've been trying my best to improve the quality of the transmission here. And I ended up trying many microphones, earpods, everything from Apple, this, that, the other. And finally I have a earphone and a fancy microphone. And if this doesn't work, then I'm going to give up and focus just on self-realization, no communication. So please tell me if it's working or not. You listening and able to listen? Is the sound clear? Is the reception any good? And please let me know. I'm of course seeing wonderful messages from all of you, but can you please tell me if you can hear me clearly? If the reception is good, if you can see everything, and if you can, then I would like to start. How's it going, guys? Can you hear me? Sound is great. Carl. Yay! So now we can start. Okay, so today is the ninth installment of my series on the mystery of death. And I just want to make it clear that while each of these talks that I give is hopefully independently sensible or make sense, but if you want to really go deep into the mystery of death, then go back to the series. Start with number 1 and go back to all the series, because I'm building up on each of the topics that I've covered before. Yesterday, for example, or whenever, yesterday, day before, I spoke about ghosts and why ghosts are real. I also spoke about why anything you can see is not real, or anything you can conceive of is not real. So you have to go back to all of that and reinforce your understanding of what I have been saying. And a lot of you already have this understanding. So in one little bit, let me summarize where we are right now. Where we are right now is that if you understand the ontological primitive of the universe as pure consciousness, and witnessing awareness as an aspect of that pure consciousness, then everything that we call everyday experience of reality can easily be understood. Otherwise, we're stuck with something called the hard problem of consciousness, which I've addressed before. How do atoms, molecules, force fields, particles, matter create experience? Any experience: thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, images, perceptions, intuition, insight, creativity, imagination, on and on. And we cannot explain that by assuming that physical matter is the ontological primitive. So if physical matter is not the fundamental reality, then your physical body is also not the fundamental reality, right? Because your physical body is made of atoms, molecules, force fields, particles, etc., etc. So if physical matter is a projection of consciousness, so is your body, so is your mind, so is anything that you call reality. There's no exceptions. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, perceptions are entangled in every experience, and it is consciousness, pure consciousness, modifying itself into experience. Even as pure consciousness modifies itself into experience, it creates the notion. Please remember this. As soon as pure consciousness modifies itself into experience, it also creates the notion of an experiencer and as object of experience. It creates the notion of an observer and an object of observation. It creates the notion of a seer and a scenery. In other words, every experience has to have those three components: observer, observed, and observation. Knower, known, and knowing. Seer, seeing, and scenery. Otherwise, there is no experience. No experience. Okay. So, if we look at the world objectively today through the window of science, and I don't want to go into too many details, but if we look at the world objectively through the window of science, then the current theories, whether the general theory of relativity or special theory of relativity, which looks at the universe on a cosmic scale, or we look at microscopic levels of experience, force fields, particles, electricity, etc. Either way, we end up with something called a quantum vacuum from which all of creation emerges. And right now, our scientists, with their current models, even while they're searching for a unified field theory, the current models of science identify four forces as giving rise to everything in the universe. Only four forces. So the first is electromagnetism. We know what that is. Electricity, magnetism. We are communicating through electromagnetic activity right now. You are listening to me, hearing me, looking at me, because we are exchanging information. You're giving me your feedback through all this text messages. All this, we are basically navigating the electromagnetic field. So that's the first force in nature. The second force in nature is something referred to as the strong interaction, which is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. All the quarks are held together because they all have positive charges. So how do they stay together? Because of the strong interaction. You disrupt the force, what do you get? An atomic explosion. Powerful. So strong force is the second force. The third is called the electroweak force, which is responsible for radioactive decay. And then the fourth force, Christina Tara Peterson, I'm so happy you're here. So the fourth force is called gravity. Once again, electromagnetic force, the strong interactions, the weak interactions, and gravity. Now, as far as the mathematical equations of science are concerned, the first three forces are reconciled as the same entity. So electromagnetic fields, particles, force fields, strong interactions, weak interactions are all the same force. Let's call it the force. But then there's another force that cannot be accommodated through the equations of physics, of the mathematical equations of relativity, whether it's general relativity or special relativity. And that force is called gravity. So many people now think that gravity is not actually a force, that gravity is something that occurs as a result of curvature of space and time. Now, of course, if I asked you to imagine curvature of space and time, that's pretty difficult, right? You can't imagine the curvature of space and time, because how do you curve space and how do you curve time? That's right now the loophole in the unified field theory. There's another loophole in the unified field theory. It doesn't explain any experience. It doesn't experience thoughts or feelings or emotions or desires or imagination or instincts or drives or anything that we call everyday reality. Everyday reality, you're not actually directly experiencing gravity. You're experiencing the fact that your body doesn't fly off the earth. You're experiencing the sunrise and the sunset as the earth rotates on its axis and moves around this sun. You're experiencing the seasons. And these are explanations. Gravity, force fields, particles are explanations for the forces of nature, which should ultimately be giving us an explanation for everything, including our own mind. But they don't. That's why it's called a hard problem. Okay, they don't. Which means we should question our assumptions. All scientific assumptions should be questioned right now, because science is based on subject-object split. It's is that Lindsay Briner? Great to see you here, Lindsay. Okay, so what do I say? Our assumptions that force fields, particles, atoms, molecules, gravity create every experience. It's a pretty interesting assumption, but it doesn't really explain. It doesn't explain experience. It doesn't explain fundamental experience, through which we know everything, whether we know a sunset or our body or a painting behind me or a statue. How do we know this? Well, because we are experiencing all of this that we call in the theater of space-time and causality. We're giving names to our experiences, and those names include everything that you can find in a dictionary. A dictionary is just the naming of every experience, every context, every relationship, anything that we call experience. The name can be found for it in the dictionary. But the four forces of nature cannot be implicated in any of these experiences that we call subjective experiences. So, what to do? What to do? That's where I'm bringing in today's topic: the mystery of birth, the mystery of death, the mystery of God, the mystery of the universe is actually contained only in one mystery, which is I am. Before the question is asked, does God exist? Who asked the question? I do. You do. Before we ask what is the nature of the universe, who asked the question? I do. You do. Before we ask the question, does God exist? What is the meaning of existence? There has to be an entity that is asking the question, right? Who or what asks the questions? Who or what knows experience? Who or what designs experiments? Who or what comes up with theories? And why? Why is this need to explain experience, which seems to be a human need? I can't think of a dolphin or a frog or a mosquito or an insect with 100 eyes asking what is the meaning of existence and how do we experience existence? Because experience of existence, awareness of existence, and the questions of existence all are entangled. You know, Heisenberg is famously quoted, and I'm paraphrasing Heisenberg. Heisenberg is famously quoted as saying that nature never reveals herself to us as she is, but only to our methods of questioning, only as exposed to our methods of questioning. Now, while I'm the biggest fan of people like Heisenberg and Schrödinger and Wolfgang Pauli and Max Planck, who were very keyed, tuned in to idealistic philosophy and consciousness, and came up with the Copenhagen theory of, or Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics and all of that. And I'm a great fan of these. slightly lesser fan of Einstein, because Einstein really didn't get it. He was a naive realist, and we've discussed naive realist assumes the matter is physical and that it is real. Naive realism believes on subject-object split. Naive realism says that the physical world exists just as represented by the five human senses, even in the absence of a conscious observer. Never mind the perceptions of other sentient species, and so many assumptions that are there that go into naive realism, and yet we've built a whole science and technology based on it, which works. So part of the theory works, but naive realism doesn't explain the most fundamental thing, which is what is the source of thought? What is the source of perception? What is the source of imagination? What is the source of emotions? So when we look at consciousness, we can summarize consciousness in only three components. Number one, cognition. Cognition means understanding, knowing, perception, thinking, and reflecting. That's one property of consciousness that we can all agree on. Without cognition, there's no experience, no understanding, no perception, no thought. Second, emotions. Emotions are more than cognition, because emotions are feelings, and we don't usually include our feelings as part of rational understanding. But should, because we are creatures of emotion. We pretend to be rational, and rationality is a system of thought that holds empirical facts as fundamental truth. And I've already gone over this, that empirical facts are not fundamental truth, but a species-specific mode of observation for evanescent, ephemeral, transient, permanent, perceptual snapshots. That's all they are. A particle is a perceptual snapshot. It's a space-time event in consciousness. So it is experience that comes first, and the knowing of experience that comes first, and then the concepts and constructs around the experience that we call force fields, particles, atoms, molecules, galaxies, etc. Now, science tells us there are 2 trillion galaxies, that there are 700 sextillion stars, that there are uncountable trillions of planets. Who created the science? Human beings. Who are human beings? One particular species on one particular planet, which wouldn't be even a speck of dust in an infinite void somewhere in the junkyard of infinity. So we are not even the equivalent of a COVID-19 on a grain of sand, literally, on a speck of dust in junkyard of infinity, which has 2 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, uncountable planets. And here we are coming out with how do we know what we know? How do we know there are 2 trillion galaxies? Because all we have access to is sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts, and perceptions, which are modified forms of the self or of consciousness. As pure consciousness first, then witnessing awareness, then as mind, then as intellect, then as ego, then as body. But everything you call the universe is a perceptual and cognitive happening, and a snapshot of that in consciousness. So, what is space on a subjective level? What is space right now? Space is the absence of objects, but actually space contains as much energy as the objects, if not more. Empty space contains more energy than the objects in the space. And the space itself is modifying itself into the objects. There's no difference between objects and space. If you took away all the objects, space would disappear also. The distance between two objects is what we call space. And that space we actually experience, even perceptually, as emptiness. And the objects we see experience perceptually as having 3 dimensions. But they're both made of the same stuff. They're both coming out of the quantum vacuum. Take away the space, take away the objects, even space disappears. Space is the distance between what we call objects, and time is the distance between perceptions and thoughts and images in consciousness. But they're actually the same thing, because space is a way of measuring time and time is a way of measuring space, and they're both human constructs as soon as we have the experience of an object. That's it. They're the same thing. They create the theater, the interface for experience, where we see objects moving around, some independently. The Earth seems to be moving independently, spinning on its axis, hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. The solar system is exquisitely fine-tuned, so we all feel the same amount of gravity as long as we are on Earth and we are humans. Of course, a dolphin or a seawater animal has a different experience of that which we call gravity, etc., etc. We've covered this material. But space-time are human constructs for experience. And in that experience, there are objects, some which move by themselves. The Earth and galaxies and stars are all moving as a result of what we call gravity, which is the curvature of space-time. But I just told you, we are the creators of space-time, which means in the most interesting way that gravity is a human construct for an experience, as is everything else. Okay, time is a human construct, space is a human construct, objects are a human construct for perceptual activity. Your physical body is a human construct. The Milky Way galaxy is a human construct. But here's the interesting thing. If I look out of my window and I see a tree, that is symbolically an expression of me as the tree, because it's my perceptual activity that creates the experience of the tree. And the tree I'm looking at is a Deepak tree. The tree you're looking at is a Paul tree or a Leslie tree or a Rita Kumar tree or whatever. Each of us creates the experience in every moment, in every snapshot of perception. So why do we all see the same tree? Well, actually we don't. You know, even as humans, our experience of the tree is slightly different. Of course, our interpretation, what experience we get mentally is different. I look at a sunset and it's so gorgeous, so beautiful, so red, and there's a rainbow. And then, you know, scientists tell me that sun is nothing but a thermonuclear reactor. If you're close to it, you would be incinerated. And so there it is. And the image you see over there is nothing but electromagnetic activity. There it is. There is no beauty in electromagnetic activity or in the scorching heat of the sun. And those are alternate ways of experiencing reality. Every way of experiencing reality is equally valid or equally invalid. Whether it's force fields or particles or space or time or the Milky Galaxy or a star-filled sky or your physical body or the appearance of a raccoon or a camel or a butterfly or an insect or a tree, you are modifying yourself as that experience. You are modifying yourself as the experience of space, time, energy, information, and matter. Linda says, we are light. Yes, Linda, we are light, but light is not photons. Light is awareness, which mysteriously transforms photons into the experience of color, shape, form, and what we call objects, including our own body. Yes, we are messengers of light, and the light is the light of awareness. Okay, so every experience, perception is a snapshot. That snapshot creates both the experiencer and that which is experienced. The seer and the scenery, the observer and the observed, The thinker and the thought, the knower and the known are born with every snapshot of experience, The only continuity is the presence of being, which creates a narrative around those snapshots of experience. The narrative can be a mythical narrative, a religious narrative, a scientific narrative, a mathematical narrative. Doesn't matter, even the narrative is created in consciousness. Both the experience and the interpretation of experience is created in consciousness. So what is happening? Only the infinite is the source of all experience. And when we use words like universe, that's a human construct for an experience in consciousness. When we use words like God, God, we think of a creator somewhere in the sky, and in many religions that creator is some dead white male with a long beard. My beard is not that long yet, but that's the concept. Some magnificent being, but still personified by humans. Whether it's a deity, God, male, female, goddess, Dakini, etc. And that's a human concept. God is a human construct. Before that, we ask, what is God? Who is God? I am has to be present to ask the question. Before we ask, what is the universe made of? I am has to be present to ask the question. So, God, universe, all of this are human constructs. The only reality is I am, which creates the constructs. Whether it's the concept of God, electromagnetic activity, force fields, particles, anything that we can give a name to is just a human construction for a bandwidth of experience which is very limited. So think of a narrow slit in a wall, and you're looking through that narrow slit. Obviously you can't see the whole panorama. You'll see only what the slit allows you to see. You can't see the whole universe through a narrow slit. You have to expand the slit, and then you see more. And the more you expand it, the more you see it. Now what if the slit had no boundaries? What if there was no slit at all? No boundaries. What would you see? You'd actually probably see nothing, because the seeing is only through limitation. The seeing is only through creating a construct, and the seeing is only the interpretation of what is seen in the slit. And the slit is the narrow bandwidth of perceptual activity that is human in our case. Okay? That narrow activity can be expanded through breaking down conceptual boundaries, through actually going beyond all systems of thought, by understanding ourselves as the source of thought, as the source of perception, as the source of interpretation, as the source of imagination, as the source of creativity, as the source of insight, as the source of intuition, as the source of vision. So whatever you imagine in consciousness, ultimately, somehow becomes a perceptual activity, because imagination and perception and sensations and thoughts and images are all entangled. So, of course, we look at some species I mentioned: a camel, a giraffe, a hippopotamus, an anteater. These species look like they shouldn't look like what they look like. They're very unusual, and yet they're perfectly adapted to their environments. Think of dinosaurs, huge dinosaurs flying across the sky, huge animals spanning many meters, How unusual, how unlikely, but they exist. Okay, so whatever you see out there is actually a perceptual modification of an image. A perceptual modification of an image. Do angels exist? Well, can you imagine an angel? Do ghosts exist? Well, can you imagine a ghost? Do goblins, elfins exist? My first question is, can you imagine it? If you can't imagine it, then it'll never become a perceptual experience. But if you start to imagine it, it can become a perceptual activity, and if only you are experiencing that perceptual activity, then others will call you a psychotic or a sage or a genius or somebody with such a vivid imagination that you're hallucinating your imagination. That's what others will say. But to you, that experience is real. And if that experience becomes real for a lot of us, then there it is. Dinosaur, anteater, human being, stars, Milky Way galaxy, trees, rocks, objects, insects, all human constructs for modes of knowing and experience in awareness, modifying itself as all those experiences. Furthermore, if you recognize that every perception you have is already of the past, when I look at the Milky Way galaxy, I'm seeing something that existed millions of years ago. When I look at a star that was present, say that's 100 million light years away, and that star system died out 50 million light years away and burnt itself up into the heat death of absolute zero, which means it hasn't existed for 50 million years, 50 million light years, then for 50 million light years, I will still experience it. It's a ghost. Every time you look at the cosmos, you're looking at a ghost. Every time you look at anything, including your own body, it's a ghost. Why? Because the body you look at as that particular snapshot didn't exist when you took the previous perceptual snapshot. In fact, by the time you hear these words, they don't exist. By the time you see me, what you saw doesn't exist. So you're already experiencing an apparition, a ghost, something that doesn't exist. Everything that you experience in the material world is a ghost, is an apparition. It's a memory. It's the interpretation of a memory, and the interpretation of the memory is projecting as space-time causality, objects, persons, people, insects, rocks, stars, the whole theater of space-time and causality, created in what we call the self. That is what Lord Krishna says when he says, Prakratim swam vashtabai vishrajami puna puna. Curving back within myself, I create again and again. I create the mind, I create the body, I create the universe. I create concepts like energy, information, space-time, matter. These are notions. I create concepts like God. I create concepts like the universe, notions. I create concepts like Deepak Chopra, notion. All notions. And who's coming up with the notions? I am. So, the mystery of birth, death, space-time, causality, existence is what? It's the mystery of I am. Once you cross the boundary into not only who am I, but what am I? Because what is more than who. Who implies a person, some kind of personality. When in fact, the personality and the who and the body and the mind are actually a changing perceptual activity in I am. I am is the source of even I am Deepak Chopra. Okay. So Javier says, can you talk about telepathy? Yes, Javier. Telepathy is a dormant, non-local potential that exists in every human being, but actually exists in animals even more. Dogs and cats can sense extra sensory phenomena better because they don't have conceptual models. As a consequence of COVID-19, part of human construction, manipulation of our sense and wisdom, my humble opinion, Carmen asked. Carmen, we have to be very careful. COVID-19 is causing a lot of death and a lot of mortality and a lot of disease. Cannot push it away as an illusion unless you push away your very body-mind existence as an illusion. In which case, yes. Okay? But ask yourself also, and I'm asking this right now, we are reading reports of animals getting COVID-19, but we are not reading reports of animals dying. Maybe we'll see that, but so far we haven't. And animals are getting infected, but they're not dying. Only human beings are dying. Why is that? In the human beings, there's an extra component, and that component is the stress, the fear, and the panic that is raising our cortisol levels, adrenaline levels, creating COVID storms, inflammatory storms, and what we call cytokine storms, which is making the whole thing worse. But it would be too dismissive if we dismissed COVID-19 as another illusion. You can't do that unless you dismiss your body and the whole universe as an illusion when it is fine. Because once you do that, then you also have the ability to create new concepts. Stephen, is outside us real? No, it's not. There's no outside, there's no inside. It's just consciousness creating the experience of perceptions, which we call outside, and create the experience of thoughts and feelings that we call inside. But there's no inside or outside. All is in consciousness. Okay, so let's choose a mantra for today with this concept. I think the mantra would be Pragyanam Brahma. Pragyanam Brahma. I am the total understanding of pure consciousness. Let's do that today. Pragyanam Brahma. Pragyanam Brahma. The understanding. I am the pure understanding, the pure consciousness in which the whole universe is conceived, constructed, governed, and comes into existence. I can see from your concepts that from your comments that you guys are way ahead on this whole thing, and I could learn a lot from you. So Wanda says, my daughter reads my mind. Well, if you watch somebody's facial expressions, their eye movements, their micro expressions, listen to the tone of the voice, look at their body gestures, body language, you'll also be able to read everybody's minds. Thank you, and I'm so happy that today's broadcast worked out. I'm going to use the headphones, I'm going to use the microphone. You want me to talk about empaths, talk about other things, be very happy to do that in the near future. So one or two of you are saying that sound is cutting off and you can't hear me now and then, but we'll keep working at it. Nobody's talking about farm animals infected. They are beginning to talk about that, and it's very important to look at all these things that are happening, and even as animals are getting infected, how many of them are getting sick or dying. So we'll keep exploring this. I think the more we explore this together, the more we learn from each other, and the more understanding we'll have. So in the meanwhile, thank you, God bless, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars. And I am going to keep you the headphones and the microphone. Okay? Goodbye for today.